Doesn't this look familiar? How about now? The hooks inside the Silt Strider chamber basically look like a car's gearbox with 4 sticks. I'm probably gonna regret this later, but tell me I'm wrong. They even remind me of a D-pad. Every time I see them, I start wondering, is it even easy to ride a Silt Strider? Is it painful for them? And how do you even control a creature that huge? Sure, we can see those dedicated hooks, but are they always there or are they added somehow? And how does that process even work? Oh, and what about the whole passenger space? Is it naturally part of the Silt Strider's shape or did the Dunmer carve a hole in its carapace? These questions bugged me so much that I decided to answer all of them. I also wanted to find out exactly at what stage Silt Strider training begins. To do that, I had to figure out their whole life cycle based on what I could find in Morrowind's lore and real-life arthropods. The research took a while, but I discovered tons of interesting information from a variety of sources, including unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, a book about the Dunmer and how they train Morrowind creatures, and even Silt Strider caravaner logs from Elder Scrolls Online. I also spoke with a Silt Strider owner and Solstheim in Skyrim who shared a few extra details about these creatures. Okay, let's dive in. Silt Striders are giant arthropods native to Morrowind and can grow at least 20 feet tall, often much taller. Caravanners control them by manipulating exposed organs and tissues with special hooks. That sounds pretty painful, doesn't it? But is it really? Because when you think about it, Silt Striders are huge creatures who could probably hurt you badly if they wanted to. So if someone put a lot of pressure on them, I'd expect them to either defend themselves or run away from the pain. According to the lore page, when they are used for transport, a compartment is carved directly out of the creature's shell, and yeah, that definitely doesn't sound painless. Their shell is very hard, so I imagine shaping a proper space for travel must be tricky. Cutting through the shell itself might not hurt too much because it probably has no nerves, like our fingernails, but you could accidentally damage tissues just below it. Not to mention the hooks used to control them are shaped to fit hands, so I wonder if it's even possible to do it in a completely harmless way. To be honest, I don't think so. Fortunately, the hooks look like they're made of some material like wood rather than from Silt Strider tissues, but still, placing them inside the creature's flesh sounds pretty painful to me. Thankfully, the lore page comes with an answer. It says this process seems to cause no meaningful harm to the creatures. Before I dug into it more, I was pretty satisfied with this info. Sure, I would personally prefer it cause no harm at all, not just no meaningful harm. But this is Morrowind we're talking about, and Vardenfell can be brutal in many ways. So no meaningful harm might actually be considered a huge win. Unfortunately, it's not the whole picture. I also found a Caravanner's travel log from the Elder Scrolls Online, and that's a pretty sad layer to all of this. It turns out that controlling a Silt Strider can absolutely cause it a lot of pain if you mess up. The log follows a several-day trip between different towns carrying passengers, parcels, and one very unskilled novice caravaner. Of course, the novice really wanted a chance to control the Silt Strider himself, and every single time he tried, things went badly. The first time he pulled the left antennal lobe, which caused a minor seizure in the Silt Strider. 2 passengers and several parcels were flung overboard. Not a great start. The next day, the novice stepped on a cluster of nerves whose name I'm definitely not going to try to pronounce. That caused the Silt Strider to violently expel its stomach contents and release its mask. Then, on the following day, he poked yet another nerve, and this time the Silt Strider started screaming. And not for a few minutes, for hours. So if controlling these creatures requires that level of precision, I honestly have no idea how anyone manages to carve a big compartment into the Silt Strider's carapace and create all those control hooks without causing serious pain. The lore page says it causes no meaningful harm, but after reading this log, I wasn't convinced at all. What is really cool though is how much detail we can find about the biology of Silt Striders. The nerves mentioned in the log follow naming conventions based on real-world insects. One is related to the head, another works like a brain center, and the last one is connected to vision. Someone clearly did their homework when writing this. I was really sad reading the log and finding out how much pain the Silt Strider had to deal with. But you know what? The story ends even worse for the novice caravaner. At some point, he simply disappears. They search for him but find no trace. The caravaner assumes he fell overboard somewhere near Zergonipol. And that's how the caravaner wraps it up. Tragic loss, morale much improved. I wouldn't be surprised if the Silt Strider just trampled him for all the pain he caused. Oh, and one last interesting detail in the logs. Zergonipol sits on the eastern side of the map where we don't have Silt Strider stabs in Morrowind. Makes me wonder if Vardenfell once had more roots than what we see in the game. Okay, but after reading the logs, I kept thinking about the Silt Striders themselves, especially the whole carving and training process. That curiosity eventually led me to an actual book that describes how the training process for Nyx oxen works. I don't think we can see them in Morrowind, but Nyx oxen are related to Nyx hounds. Yeah, I know it might be different for Silt Striders, but I couldn't find anything directly about them. Still, the process sounds kind of similar. According to the book, a specialist drills into the creature's back and opens a cavity called the drive chamber. Inside is a bundle of nerves. They insert hook tools into the flesh and then close the shell again. After about an hour, the animal stops resisting. It just stands there quietly, not really alive anymore, just empty. It sounds like it's breaking part of its nervous system that lets the creature act on its own, living it alive but completely passive, waiting for commands. For some reason, it instantly makes me think of lobotomy, where personality and initiative are removed but basic life functions remain. And yeah, I'm not even sure I wanted to know all those details. But if a similar process is used on Silt Striders, it really says a lot about how little empathy the Dunmer have. So it looks like preparing, training and riding Silt Striders requires both a lot of skill and a fair bit of cruelty to actually do all of that. And the big question is, how do the Dunmer get their Silt Striders and at what point do they start training them? To really understand all of that, let's first talk about how a Silt Strider even comes into this world. The lore page says that Silt Striders start their lives as a larva and eventually encase themselves in a tough cocoon to mature. From what I know about real-life insects, larvae usually come from eggs. That got me thinking, how amazing would it be if we could actually find massive Silt Strider eggs somewhere in Vardenfell? Just imagine how huge those eggs would have to be. We already have Quama eggs in Morrowind and those are pretty big. The largest mature Quama, the Quama Queen, is still tiny compared to a massive Silt Strider. So I guess Silt Strider eggs would be proportionally huge, right? Okay, but what happens with the cocoon, at least in real life? Inside the larva changes into the adult specimen. For example, butterflies and moths reach their final form after leaving their pupa or cocoon and don't grow anymore. But somehow I cannot imagine a Silt Strider coming out already fully grown. I'd guess it grows like other arthropods like crabs or various insects through molting, shedding its shell as it gets bigger. So Silt Striders seem to combine different arthropod life cycles. Crabs and insects like crickets or cockroaches hatch from an egg as a tiny version of the adult called a nymph. They don't have a pupa or cocoon phase at all. Each molt makes them larger and more developed. For arthropods like butterflies or moths, it looks a bit different. A larva hatches from an egg. The caterpillar eats a lot, sheds its skin multiple times and gets bigger each time. Then it stops eating and wraps itself in a cocoon or pupa. The adult emerges from it fully formed but doesn't grow anymore. From the lore page we know that Silt Striders go from larva into a cocoon stage to mature. But like I said, I cannot imagine them emerging fully grown from the cocoon. The egg and larva would have to be enormous. Silt Striders look more like beetles with cricket-like legs. And from what I've checked, beetles have a pupa phase and crickets a nymph phase. So maybe Silt Striders combine phases from different arthropod life cycles. I think their life cycle might go something like this: an egg, a larva that creates a cocoon, a nymph that grows through molting, and finally the adult. We can find empty shells spread across Vardenfell, which may suggest that Silt Striders molt. Of course, those could also be from individuals that didn't survive. What do you think? I'm not an insect expert, so if I got something wrong about real-life life cycles, let me know in the comments. Before I dive any further, I just want to invite you to join the Discord server I created this year. We discuss topics related to Morrowind and other classic games. We also share casual stuff like memes, our hobbies, music we like, or just daily life. You can find the link in the channel description and the video description. Okay, so we know the life cycle, or at least the theory I came up with, but how is an egg even created? From the lore page, these creatures have special glands that produce a unique musk which they use to attract mates. Their mating behavior is described as awkward flailing, and apparently it can be dangerous if you get too close. Now, let's pause for a second. Those long, tentacle-like front appendages, are they really for reproduction? I always thought they were more for grabbing food or defending themselves. I looked into how arthropods feed in real life, and they have all kinds of mouth parts for chewing, biting, or drinking. Think about butterflies. They have that long tube to drink drink nectar. I wonder if Silt Striders might use their front limbs in a similar way. Maybe these limbs have multiple purposes, or maybe I'm just misinterpreting that awkward flailing. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any information about those front limbs specifically. So at what stage do you start training a Silt Strider? I'd say it has to be a fully grown adult specimen. Imagine what would happen if this were done on a smaller bug. What if you carved a special hole in the shell for passengers and then the Silt Strider just shed the rest of its shell? Maybe the hole would stay and not grow back? But it's Morrowind we're talking about, so you never know. With magic, there are probably different possibilities, but it still makes more sense to just wait until they're fully grown. Now, let's visit a Dunmer in Solstheim in Skyrim to see what he has to say on that topic. He stands in his camp with his Silt Strider named Dusty. Talking with the merchant reveals a few more details about Silt Striders that actually confused me a bit. Let's listen to him.
The blast from the volcano wiped most of them out. Found Dusty in a small cave on Vardenfell. Silt Strider cocoons are pretty tough.
Okay, so he found Dusty in a small cave on Vardenfell and the cocoon helped her survive the volcanic eruption. But that info doesn't actually say whether she was found as a cocoon or a small adult. Definitely not in her full adult form, because I can't imagine a huge Silt Strider just hanging out in a cave. But the merchant says something weird. He trained Dusty from a larva. Training a larva doesn't seem quite right, because the larva actually wraps itself into a cocoon and he said the cocoon helped her survive. So he could never have seen her in the larva stage. I assume that he actually trained the smallest adult form that came out of the cocoon. But I wonder what training really means. In the book about Nyx hounds, it was actually cutting the shell and inserting hooks into the flesh. Maybe training a Silt Strider is much more complex. You might, for example, have to first socialize it with people, and then when it grows into a full adult, you cut the shell and put in the hooks. And maybe the hooks in the case of Silt Striders are just a way to communicate with them and not to take away their ability to act on their own like with the Nyx hounds. Unfortunately, I couldn't find more on that topic. If you know anything else or know some Morrowind bugs that cover this, let me know. The interesting part about this Dunmer merchant is that you can actually buy a Nyx hound from him to be your companion. After reading that book about how these creatures are trained, or rather their relative specimens, if you can even call it training, I feel a little sad about it. On one hand, it feels right to take it with you and treat it well, but on the other hand, giving it commands feels kinda wrong. And you know what the worst part of all of this is? The Silt Strider population took a huge hit during the Red Year when Red Mountain erupted and destroyed most of their native habitat. A small number were later imported to Solstheim. And Dusty is actually dying, and the Dunmer decided to stay with her and make sure she passes peacefully. He seems to have a heart compared to some of the Dunmer in the book, but I'm still sad about Dusty and all the Silt Striders on Vardenfell that died because of the eruption. Let's give Dusty respect for her service in her final moments. Goodbye, Dusty, you've done well.